Welcome to the Impact Effect podcast. I've got an amazing guest today. Amanda Banks is in the house. And as you know, the first question, the most important question, everything that I live by, what is impact to you?
Yeah.
And how do you show up in the world and provide impact today?
I think at its core, impact is when two things collide, whether for a positive reason or a negative reason. And so for me, I look at impact and influence as they go hand in hand, right? To make an influence
Of course.
in a positive or negative way, that ultimately drives impact. And so for me, I'm always thinking through, how can I leverage my influence to help make an impact in the lives of other people?
Boom. Look at that. It was almost
Simple.
rehearsed.
It wasn't, though.
But that's the beauty in it, right?
I know, right?
And it's always interesting, and I've actually never shared this, but it's very easy for me to cipher through some of the guests when they've thought through this. Like you just rattled that off the top of your head. It was clean, it was simple, it was precise. It sounds like you've done the work, prepared, not for the podcast, but what you do in life to provide impact. Yeah. And I just want to point that out because I think that's a little bit different than some of our previous guests. So
I think as entrepreneurs and heart-centered leaders, we have to really dive into these things. And oftentimes we don't do the heavy lifting on our own behaviors, how we want to show up in the world. And I think once we go through those exercises, questions like this just become second nature, right? Because we've gone down that pathway and, good, bad, right? Like I've made positive influences and negative influences which have driven positive impact and negative impact. So I think just it's the continuous learning journey for individuals that dive into personal and professional development.
Totally. And you brought up positive impact and negative impact, which is something that I've more recently talked about based on just why I chose the word impact, what my perception of impact was growing up and how it changed to a positive. Everything we do has impact. Do you believe that? Like, have you experienced some of those things where maybe you went, oh, darn, and you've noticed that was good or that was bad? As far as impact
of course.
goes?
Hopefully this makes an impact to somebody, right? And I think that oftentimes we think about the big picture and we're like, oh my gosh, we want to do the big things to make this dramatic impact. And the reality is like, to your point, you as a human being showing up every single day, good or bad, you're influencing or making an impact in the lives of every single person you're touching.
Totally.
And so that's really powerful when you start thinking about not just this engagement, right? But like, what's the ripple effect?
Boom.
And I find there's so much beauty in not understanding the ripple effect and just allowing things to happen. So once again, hopefully this conversation helps impact somebody in a really meaningful way that then allows them to continue the ripple effect in their own lives.
I love it. It's when did you realize how much impact your words have? Is there a point in time? Is there a story where maybe you can share with us where you're like, oh, wow, this is really good and had a lot of good impact? Or, oh, wow, maybe I shouldn't have said that or positioned it that way because perception was negative?
I think it's a continuous journey, right? Like I can't say that like I'm completely figured all of these things out,
of
right?
Course,
like
of
none
course.
of us have. So I think that it's like the continuous journey and involvement of who I am as a human being. And I think that now the thing is, I recognize when I'm either positively or negatively impacting somebody. And I'm trying to get better about how do I move forward from this, especially if I'm negatively impacting somebody. Because the reality is like, we are all operating on our daily lives and hopefully showing up to the best of our abilities. But sometimes we make those negative impacts and we don't even realize it, right? So it's how do you as a leader recover from some of that stuff? And none of us are perfect, right? So I think it's a continuous evolvement for me. And as I continue to learn and grow in my own leadership capacity, that I just know how to adjust a little bit differently. And I know how powerful like those words can absolutely be.
Totally. It's interesting too, like when you really think about it deep down, perception is different and unique for everybody, right? And reality for people are drastically different.
Yep.
I mean, not getting into politics, but look what's happening because of the time period we're in.
Yep.
Not saying left or right, none of that, but just the reality of
we're not diving politics
of where we're at, though, right? Like, it's very unique, and there's things happening and people saying things that have positive and negative impact. I had mentioned something before on a mastermind, and it was a light joke. Wasn't like anything terrible by no means, but it was like oh, a bunch of people are sending me books. Like, I this is great, but I have like 25 books. I'm not going to read them. Um, hey, if you're going to send me a book, we should probably talk before, and
Yeah.
maybe I'll open it up, right? But how I said it, and I just hearing it again now, the impact was like I'm kind of a jerk because someone's giving me something, and I'm kind of talking negatively about it. And it was something that I didn't put a lot of pressure on, didn't think much about, but someone brought it up to me like 6 months later.
Yeah.
And they had a book they wanted to share with me, and they didn't, and they discussed it with me, and I was like, wow, just that little thing I mentioned had negative impact. Wow, like,
Yeah.
and in reality, I wasn't upset people were sending me books or anything like that. I just made a statement of like, I don't. Two people gave me books. I don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
So something as small and minimal as that, but I just remember that coming back, and that was when I really was like, wow, everything that comes out of my mouth in a leadership role, whether it's this lighthearted joke and it didn't mean anything to me, I need to understand that impact.
I think that this is where grace comes into place. And this also comes with a perspective of like, we have got to become, all of us need to be much better about sharing when things are painful. I've been doing a lot of diving around pain as a redirection of purpose. So there are things that will come across our paths, things that like you'll say, I say, that will be painful to somebody else. Yep. And the reality is like oftentimes we just kind of hold on to that information, and then over time that festers. And so we're judging other people's behavior based on a pain response from our own reactions. And oftentimes the other person doesn't even think twice about it, right? And so I think that this is where, like, when we talk about building meaningful relationships, I think it's very important, and I'm having to learn this the hard way. This is something that I am deeply having to learn, is like, we have to advocate for our own reactions, but we also have to be able to have those tough conversations and just know that like other people's reactions, like they do matter, and we do need to have those difficult conversations, but we also have to ask for them. So like, it's actually quite courageous that that other person came up to you and said, hey, look, like this was painful. Because that allows you the opportunity to learn. And that's where like I think that a lot of us are going wrong, is like we're navigating through all these things, making assumptions, maybe even hearing about other people from our community, like, oh, this person's doing this, that, or the other, but you're only getting a slight perspective.
Totally.
And so if you care, then you have to start asking questions and get the deep rooted truths, which I think there's a lot of that missing right now.
Do you think that plays into our society as a whole right now, being a little bit softer than we've been over the years? Meaning that people, if someone has an opinion or feels a way, right now in our society, we're being somewhat told to not ruffle feathers and to kind of keep that to us, and it's hurtful, and everybody's an individual, and I believe everybody's an individual, but what I disagree with is the fact that if you feel a certain way or have to have a conversation with someone about something that affects you, or you're seeking the truth, I think we have the right to go approach that conversation. It's how you approach the conversation is what I've learned can either be a good thing or a bad thing. And you brought something up that sparked my thought on this, was asking questions to get to the deep root, opposed to assumptions and statements based on what you've heard previously or prior.
Here's what I'd like to think. There's the statement, hurt people hurt other people, right? And that's the reality. So like, where are we coming from a place of hurt, right? Because if we're being very reactionary based versus proactive in the relationship, then that's where some of that conflict comes into play, I believe. And I think it's not that we're necessarily soft, it's that we've been hurt in so many different capacities, and there's so much chaos going on right now, and maybe even our businesses and our personal lives and our professional lives, in relationships. And I think that that's where compassion and care comes into place, is like, we have to understand that I believe most people have positive intent.
I'm with you.
I do.
I believe
truly,
99%.
but we also have to understand that those people aren't perfect. And we also have to understand we're not perfect. But if we're not willing to come together to have a conversation about it, knowing that both of us are hurt,
True.
right? So there are emotions associated to it. We can't grow forward. And that's the piece I'm really having to dive into is like, Jim, there's going to be conflict that comes into our relationship. We've known each other forever. Like, we can't have expectations that we can continue to grow and build as business professionals as perfect relationships. But we also have to learn how to have those tough conversations. And I wasn't taught that. I was taught, and this may even be like a Southern culture thing, right? Like, you know, people are going to say and do things, just forgive them and move on. And it's like, well, you have to have a conversation to understand it, because then that's festering in you in some way, shape, or form. So back to your question, like, I don't feel like we're necessarily, in quotations, soft. I feel like there's a lot of chaos. And I think for us to kind of become the eye of the storm in the world of chaos, we have to get really centered and understand that most people are operating from a place of positive intent. We have to ask those questions. And then we can't take outside sources. Media is so bad about this because you're getting one perspective. One perspective, one sentence, and like it can become a complete place of like, oh my gosh, this person said or did this, and you're like, you're getting like a slight sliver of what's going on here. So for me, text is really hard, or like email is really hard to understand intent. And we're in a place of like constant texting or firing off messages. So I've just kind of learned, like, if there's conflict or if there's something going on,
there has to be a phone call made.
There has to be a phone call, or there has to be a meeting. And you may not be ready, I may not be ready, but we have to do those things.
True. And just to talk about, I mean, you're from the South, I'm not, right? So I'll give you the other perspective.
And that's what this is about.
A text message was never perceived or received negatively, or people got upset until I moved to Nashville. To the point where someone had told me, hey, I worked with this person. They're like, dude, you need to put emojis after your text because I know you and you're an asshole. like you're super nice. You're always, hey, how can I help? Hey, what do you need? How's things going at home? Like, our relationship's great, but like sometimes your texts they're just too direct for me. So I had to learn that, which was never a problem in business, right? And I ran 500 employees, 10, 12 managers at a time, making 60, 70 grand. Like, it wasn't that I wasn't talking to people, right? And most of those operations were 24/7, 365. So I was talking to people all day, every day. And it was just different. And what I realized too is Massachusetts to Florida was different because I ran the whole East Coast. But Massachusetts to Nashville, Florida to Nashville is completely different. So when you say the South, and like when I was in that territory of Florida, it was very similar. And what I realized too is the reason why was a lot of people lived up north and moved to Florida.
Moved to the South. Well, and when you start having conversations on a global scale, right? You start building a global community.
True.
Things are different in different cultures, and words are different in different cultures. So I'm having to learn, like, the tough questions is like, what does that mean to you? What does this word mean to you? How, like, what is your experience with these things? And that's just the evolvement that I'm having to personally grow through to become a better leader. And I think that the beautiful thing is, like, we all make mistakes. And that's okay. And it's about how do we recover from those mistakes. And I think that right now, a lot of people judge people based off of their mistakes and only look at that one point in time when they've been experiencing even a long-term relationship with somebody. And it's like,
true.
If you're willing to judge me based on this one mistake, then cool. That's like, I like, cool.
That's okay.
I'm okay. Like,
but Mel let's Robbins, talk about it.
Like in the phrase of Mel Robbins, like, let him go, like, by all means. But it's interesting because in media, especially when you're talking about the book situation, like when you're visible or when you're building influence and you're trying to make an impact, like, you're going to make mistakes.
Totally.
So you have to become very courageous around how you actually approach these scenarios.
It's funny you bring up the mistakes part because every time that I've wanted to give up on a dream, it's typically after a mistake's made
Yep.
and people and relationships have made me feel that I'm insufficient or should not be doing this, and I want to quit.
Yeah.
And I think some of those relationships, we talk about how awesome relationships are. We talk about positive impact in relationships, but a lot of relationships have a negative influence or a negative impact, and that hurts in a lot of different ways. And when you admire someone or you look up to someone and they judge you or think negatively on you because you said or did something that you, in most cases, still believe is the right thing to do, that hurts sometimes. And I don't think we talk about that enough,
Yeah.
of going through the pain of losing a relationship or, someone that you admire thinks differently of you but you believe that in your heart, and that relationship fractures or separates or diminishes.
Yeah.
And I think that's tough. And I think we talk about all the great things because we want to talk positive, and I want to be a positive person, right?
Of course. Like, I would think both of us are pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be pretty positive in this environment, right? Like, it's tough.
But I think some of those relationships, maybe they weren't meant to be.
We also have to think, and this is the painful part, right, of like the ripple effect based off that one relationship. So like I've been doing a lot of like deep diving around like I've got to be cautious on how I talk about other people. And it's not that I talk crap about other people, but like we're all on our own individual journeys, and I don't want to leave somebody with some type of negative impact that won't allow them to go through that relationship, right?
Yes.
And so I think very heavily about that. And I see this from the lens of my daughter. So a lot of these lessons that I'm learning are through her getting into high school and having to navigate tough situations,
A lot of
complicated
them.
scenarios,
Yeah.
a lot of them, bullying, all of these different types of things. And I've watched her navigate them with grace. And then I'm like, oh, well, I can learn. So that's influence and impact, right? Like we
Totally.
think about, oh, well, this person has a ton of influence on social media, so they're impactful. That's not it at all. I think every single one of us carries impact and influence. And it can be a 14-year-old kid, even like a 1-year-old daughter, right?
I mean,
and
we're getting into the TED Talk a little bit
getting
here
into the
right
TED
now.
Talk. Like, and that's the piece here is we all have to understand these are all buzzwords. These are all things that we just loosely like communicate. And there's deep rooted meaning to these things. And to your first comment, like we've got to, as leaders, dive into some of these words of like, what does this mean to us? What are the value systems associated to them so that we can go on and lead in a very positive way?
It's interesting because you had said your daughter is impacting you.
Oh, 100%.
And, me having a 1.5-year-old, still completely new to this, not knowing what the hell I'm doing, but trying to learn and grow and continuously create a positive impact. The biggest thing that I've realized and the biggest idea is it's not me that's creating the most impact. She's just by her being born, no words, I think back of like home birth, grabbing my hand, like at that point when she was screaming and just born 2 seconds ago, she's already had more impact on my life, my decisions, where I'm going, how I'm following my dreams, than I think I will ever impact her. And the reason why is because it starts with me and my wife at the top of the food chain, right? So like we're impacted and we're here, and we're the person that now impacts her here. Well, the reality of it is I've been impacted by her being born so much that I've made so many changes, at which in turn will put me in a position to be the conduit to then create impact for her. It sounds convoluted as I say it. The simple piece is like she changed me, so I can now better change her for the positive in the future.
That's the beautiful thing about becoming a parent, in my opinion, is like in that specific moment, everything changed for me. Like everything. And, I've used that experience to try to be the best human being that I can possibly can for this little nugget. That, and the cool thing is as they get older, we have a big emphasis on building relationships at home. Like we're very supportive of one another. We very much recognize that like we are very unperfect human beings. These conversations are going to be tough, but the beautiful thing is like there's a friendship there that I can see like this carrying on my entire life. Nice. Right. And so it's such a beautiful experience, and parenthood, if done right, in my opinion, can be such an incredible catalyst to take you to a whole other level of your own personal and professional development. I would have never thought about these types of things without her being the catalyst to the information. So I look at that word catalyst. I'm a catalyst to a lot of people. She's a catalyst to a lot of people. My husband is a catalyst to me, right? And I think,
man, you're getting me all emotional over here as I'm thinking through you saying this, and I'm thinking about my life, and just like, man, whew.
Well, and that's the thing is like for entrepreneurs like us that are motivated and driven to truly make a difference in the world, right? We can call it impact, we can call it influence, we can call it a million different words, right? But like ultimately it comes down to we as human beings have a deep-rooted purpose to make a substantial impact in a positive and meaningful way for other people.
Yes.
So, that starts at home with my daughter, and I can kind of see now how all of that goes. But there has to be those deep-rooted relationships that allow us to do what we do.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to have, my husband who is that catalyst. In marriage, we can go down that rabbit hole. Like, it's not always been easy.
Of course not.
Right? But he has always been kind of that deep-rooted, as well as my mom. And I think about that and I'm like, we all as human beings need these types of relationships that allow all of us to make a difference.
Yep.
And regardless of what our individual purpose is, we have to surround ourselves with people that are not going to judge us based on mistakes, that are going to be there to allow us to be our best humanness.
Yep.
And then figure out internally, like, what am I doing right and what am I doing wrong and how can I be better? And I believe that that's an ecosystem, right? So like, it's not just like, it's not just this one-off. It's not just these one-offs. And we have to start thinking about, this is so silly. So I was watching Ryan Serhant's new real estate thing, like
Owning Manhattan.
Like trash TV is like my like meaningless, like
escape.
Yeah. It's just like, I'm going to watch some trash TV. And I started thinking about, him with all of these crazy people. I mean, some of these personalities are just over the top. And I'm sitting here thinking, as an entrepreneur, I haven't built my business in that way, but I have a community of people that aren't, in quotations, my employees.
Yeah.
But they serve that type of purpose in my life.
Totally.
So how is this impacting my business, and how am I leading in an appropriate way and navigating all the complexities of everything going on? So it's simple things like that like, I think that there's an awareness level that I have that I didn't have 3 years ago.
Totally.
Of how an ecosystem makes a difference in all of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's building that base, right? Which you talked about at home, right? You built that base, relationship centric, being the catalyst, understanding the importance of that. People are power, right? And then you go into the world with that idea, and you've got all these people. They're not your employees.
No. But
they're relationships that play a role, and you play a role in the relationship for them. And that's the exchange. And it brings me back to just human connection in general, right? All the depth I've been doing, the studying, the TED Talk, all of it has been around that piece of understanding the depth that's there, right? And it's like, well, it has to be a win-win situation. Human connection has to be a win-win, or their connection's broken, right? Like it just doesn't work. The elastic's being pulled this way, it's being pulled this way, but if both people aren't winning, it breaks. And I think that's how you build the community is, you want to be there and you want to be in a relationship with someone to where you can provide that value in hopes that there is a win-win and everybody prospers and rises together. And I think that's the difference. And it comes down to the fundamental thought process of, is it you over them? Or do you truly believe that there's good intent on both sides of this and we can both rise together and the relationship's just going to get stronger and we're going to both grow? And I think most people, it comes down to the fundamental thought around human connection of me over you.
Yeah.
Right?
This is really powerful.
This isn't life or death shit we're talking about, right? So let's not go down the road of like me versus you. If there's a car in the road and it's going to kill one of us, you know, I'm gonna die, right? Like we're not talking extreme like that.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is simple interaction day to day.
Yeah.
And that's where I think people, I'm so great at human connection, or I've got all these relationships, and then you find out that it's hollow because, or you audit the relationship. I talked to a client recently about auditing relationships, and I just did this recently and purged 7 people out of my life because when I audited it, I never won, or there was no intent for me to benefit in the relationship, right? And it doesn't need to be, again, me winning over you losing. That's not the comparison I'm making. What I'm saying is, I look back and I connected you with this person. I got you this for free. I helped you get this. I recommended that. I mean, like 8, 9, 10 things. And I look back and there was not an offer to assist or help or support or anything. And I addressed this and it was, well, I can't make it to your event. And I said, dude, if you think this is about an event, like we are so off of human connection here. Like this has nothing to do with you coming to an event next week. Literally nothing. So, and if you look back on the messages in the text, it had nothing to do with events, right? So I think that was that assumption that we were talking about maybe early on in our conversation of like that person may be judging me or they may be thinking something that I don't even know and we haven't talked about it. So they're assuming that I'm trying to sell them something. Yeah. But if you look back, they've never bought anything from me. They've never paid for an event. They've come to events for free that I've comped. And they've never been a resource to me. So and it's just sad. And that's what I was kind of relating to even earlier in our conversation about like, sometimes you lose those situations and it's not all great. Relationships aren't great because you do have high expectations. You do think someone works in a similar way of you or there is alignment. And then when you actually dive into it, you realize that sometimes there never was alignment.
So there's a lot of people that talk the talk. There's very few that walk the walk, in my opinion. So like we can talk about relationships all day long, but like actions speak incredibly loud in these situations. True. And you know, my intent is to always provide abundant exchange in whatever way that I possibly can. I may not be able to write you a check, but I can show up. I can send a text. I can send a message. I can serve. But the reality is like there has to be mutual exchange. So like the question then becomes is, are you using people or are you leveraging for both parties
to rise together? Yeah.
And the
that's exactly the breakdown. What you just said is exactly the breakdown.
And that's the tough thing that, especially as, you know, I'd like to consider myself to be a heart-centered leader, somebody that deeply cares about other people and other relationships. And the reality is other people don't operate in that way. But it's my choice, my decision to continue to try to be better, even though I'm not perfect, to try to show up for other people. I'm not going to be perfect. To be a listening ear when I'm doing something totally messed up, which I have had a conversation about that recently with, you know, I was trying to be kind and she was like, you're not being kind because you're not being forthright with information. I didn't know. So I think a part of this is also exposure. Yeah. So I have had personally the opportunity to collaborate and work with some of the like leading experts and world's minds when it comes to these types of things. I've had exposure of how to handle certain things now that I didn't have 5 years ago. So if I'm going to live in my own integrity, that means that I have to show up in that way, regardless of how painful it can be when somebody's just using me. And there are situations that happens.
Totally.
Like people people will use other people to get what they want until there's nothing else left to take.
Yep.
And that's painful for people like us.
Totally.
But the reality is like pain is redirection of purpose. So what am I having to learn in this relationship? Is this relationship in for a season, a reason? Like there's all these different ways that we can go about figuring out like what was the purpose here. But like the reality is I control how I show up.
True.
And if I show up in a way that's hurting you, approach me about it.
Yeah.
Because I need to learn why. But most people will allow those interactions to not happen. I'm one of those people. And I've had to learn very hard the ways of like navigating some of this stuff. Like I feel like I'm being used, but it was my fault for not approaching the person and seeing what their intent was.
Totally. I mean,
this is learning.
It's not pointing the finger anymore. It's redirecting inside to figure out what can I learn from it to then ensure that it doesn't happen again, or to mitigate even the relationship before it could happen, right? Like there's relationships that I've started and I thought were great, and immediately, like I'm talking like within 48 hours, I was like, no. And that came from that exposure, that learning that, oh, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
Like you're a talker, not a doer or an action taker. And some of the leverage you said you had, you never actually had for us to collaborate, right? So what is that? What is the offer on the table at that? It's everything on my end and what on yours, you know?
And I can't judge you based on your relationship with people that may have caused pain to me in the past.
So that's actually something that's really interesting, because I had a friend asked me to not be friends with someone else that I am friends with because they hurt them. And I was really offended. I actually haven't talked to the person about this. And this conversation, I think I need to give him a phone call after this. But I was really shocked at who asked me to do that. And I didn't do it. I don't agree with that. No one controls who I can spend my time with but me. I appreciate that conversation. I take that into consideration.
Yep.
And that's the best that I can do. I'm not gonna. They've never hurt me. They've actually been a much better friend to me than you've been. If I really boil down to it, you're trying to protect me, right? That's how it was positioned. Be on this side or that side, right?
Yep.
And you want to be on my side. And in the reality of that, when I look back, that person that they don't want me to be friends with or be around or be near is a better friend to me than they are. Period. So, like it's we're not here. We're here when it comes to level of how I define a good friend.
So here's how I see it. Because I've had to do a lot of deep work around this, especially recently. There are 8.2 billion people in this freaking world. You and I are sitting here, right here in this room, when there are billions of other people that I could be sitting with. That's really powerful when you start thinking about that. So I don't want to minimize your ability to connect with that person because of a bad experience that I've perceived that I've had. And that's the thing is like, especially when we're talking about community and ecosystems, and, you know, I see it from a perspective of my daughter, gossip. Oh my gosh, there is so much freaking gossip. And once again, I've had the opportunity to learn from some incredible people. They are not gossiping about what this person did and did not do.
Yeah. They don't have time for it.
They don't have time
There's
for
more
it.
important things in their life.
There's so many more important things. So like
But I think when you gossip is when you're hurt.
I agree.
And I say that because I've done this.
We all have.
I've done it.
We all, and I will probably do it again. Like this is the learning
growth
piece.
Yeah.
But like ask about it, right? So like that's the thing that I'm starting to get a lot better about is, okay, we're going to help support one another. We're going to be in this relationship. We're going to collaborate in different ways.
How do you ask someone, and this is where I struggle.
Yeah.
How do you ask someone the truth without exposing the person who told you because they said, hey, I'm telling you this because I care about you. It needs to stay between us. How do you go to the person and ask, like, did this happen? And they're going to go, well, you're friends with that person. Well, who told you? What did they say? And now I've inserted myself into a situation of conflict and potential gossip, because there has to be a
Yeah.
truth at one side of this thing, right? And the reason why I ask you this is because I've refrained from saying something to someone and I've watched them get hurt from that person. And I didn't tell them because I didn't want to be in the drama. I just was like, it was selfish. I don't have the mental capacity to be in this fucking drama, this bullshit.
Yeah.
But that person ended up getting hurt.
Here's the things that I like to think about is what can I control? I can only control the input. I cannot control the outcome. So in these types of situations, I've gotten a lot better about this is like, look, this is my experience. Like facts,
Yeah.
right? Like this is my experience. And if it's not facts, don't gossip.
Yeah.
If you don't have firsthand knowledge or experience, don't gossip. But it's okay to say, look, this is my experience. I'm just sharing this with you as a friend. But most people take it to the next level of like, oh, don't do this or don't do that. And it's like, that's bullshit because you're minimizing their own ability to make good decisions.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about, even in my personal and professional development in my business, what can I control? I can control my reactions. So if somebody says something that's hurtful to me, I can control that. I can work on that to get better about it. But I also can ask questions. And if I ask you a question, Jim, that like, you're like, and once again, coming from a place of positive intent, if I ask you a question and we've been friends for a long time and you're incredibly reaction based,
So then you get your answer right there.
you get your answer. And that's the thing that like, it's really interesting because once again, when we're talking about this rabbit hole of relationships, right? Oftentimes we are the ones that carry the burden the other person isn't.
Yep.
And so I've had to think about that. And I've had mentorship that's had to like coach me through some of this stuff is like, I can only ask questions and I can show up to the best of my ability. If the best of my ability is 50% that day, that's what you're going to get. But it's your responsibility to ask if we've had a long-term relationship.
True.
And that's the pieces that we can control. We can control our input, our learning. We can control the things that we're focused on to get better at. We can't control the outcome or how other people react. And that's so hard for us to do, especially when we deeply care about other people.
Whew.
So like the question becomes, and anybody that's listening to this, like, what burden are you holding on to about somebody else that wasn't your burden to begin with?
Yep. It's powerful.
It's really powerful. It's also powerful to say, what burdens are you currently carrying
That you don't need to.
that you don't need to? So there are some relationships that you just don't need to carry on, and that's okay.
Yep.
They were there for a season, great.
Yep.
We learned some incredible things, but there are 8.2 billion freaking people in this world. Why?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
And that's a lesson. Like I'm having to learn how to let go. Mel Robbins says it beautifully. You have to let go. Let them go. It's okay. And that's the involvement, even from the past 2 to 3 years.
I was going to say that's the personal growth of understanding it's okay. Even
Yes.
though, but I want to talk reality here. It hurts. That sucks.
It is so painful.
That sucks. It hurts.
It is so painful. It's even, the exchange is painful, but it's even more painful when you start hearing things
Oh, it's the
that
post.
isn't reality. It's the ripple effect. And you're like, this isn't even truth.
Yeah.
So like I thought about a lot of that with myself is like, what am I carrying that isn't raw truth? There are multiple sides to every story. And if we'd like to think that people carry positive intent in all their interactions, what are we carrying that isn't truth, but is somebody else's seed that was planted in our own minds?
Yep.
And this is really powerful when you start looking at social media. So if they say that you are the top 5 people that you surround yourself with, if you look at that from a lens of social media as well, if you don't know these people, if you're only watching what you're seeing from their own perspective, you don't know where things are coming from, whether it's positive intent, negative intent, whether it's just social media garbage, whether it's I'm trying to sell things, which I've been around some people that show up really good on social media and behind the scenes it's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And so
I
think
know people
about
that coach that method.
Yeah, and
You know,
like
that is a strategy for some coaches.
it is a strategy,
And so it was a strategy for some people I've worked with and friends. And then I couldn't collaborate. I need a plan in place and a framework and a process. I can't sell you something and then build it after. That's not like,
yeah.
there's no reality to that, you know? Anyways.
I mean, we could go down this rabbit hole forever, but the reality is like, just know that you are the top 5 people that you're surrounding yourself with in person, but also if you take that like social media approach as well, if you really want to consume their content, get to know them, reach out to them. If they're like an influencer in quotations and you don't have access to them, do enough digging. And like, I'm super addicted to my phone right now. Like, I know like
the world is.
The world is like, but I also have to remember my feed is providing to me information, good nor bad. And it's so hard to decipher, and it's gonna get harder. So there's companies like Synthesia AI, which basically like it's a text to avatar. So you can put text in and have a fake avatar that basically presents the information, whether it's through training or whatever else not. Now it's going a step further where I can create the Amanda Banks avatar. It comes from my voice. Yeah. Other people can do the same thing. So like,
I've created one for me, HeyGen.ai.
And that's the thing is like,
I don't use it because it freaks me out, but I mean, there's a Jim Morris out there that is saying whatever you put in a text box. I've also had someone put that in as a joke and use derogatory and slang and prejudice with my voice because they pulled the last 7 reels off my Instagram, loaded it in, it synthesized the voice, and then they wrote all this stuff. And it was a joke, but I'm like, that's now my voice saying things I didn't say. That's not a fucking joke to me. Like, that needs to get deleted. And you need to apologize in this text message, because if this ever comes back to me, I need that, like, and that text message is saved and screenshotted.
And that's the thing is like, we've got like, this is the casting wide, like as a society, we have to get to what is truth. Yeah. What is truth? And the reality is with all of these technology platforms, it's going to continue to get muffled. Yep. And there's going to be situations that pop up. So like, I welcome and encourage people, if you see or hear something, like approach me. Now, it may hurt my feelings, but let's have a conversation about it, because that may not be the deep-rooted truth. True. Yep. I agree. Like, it's scary. And I've talked about this on live shows before, but I want to share this with like your audience as well, is like at home, we have a word that if something happens to where one of these systems calls my daughter or my husband and says, whatever, because technology can be used for good or bad, and it's so hard to decipher, she knows a question to ask, and if it's not validated, then it's not reality. Yep. And so if you have young children at home, we have done this literally like since 2 or 3, and there's just 3 of us that know it. Totally off the wall. And it's not, what is the safe word? It's the opposite. They have to communicate that. Yeah. And so
it has to come from them.
It has to come from them. And so it's a really powerful thing. And I think about that, like, how do we safeguard our businesses? How do we safeguard our relationships? How do we like, integrity is very powerful.
Yeah, I mean,
like, very powerful, but are you walking the walk or talking the talk? And it's hard to decipher.
Well, I think too is, you have to build the credibility and the reputation so people have the benefit, like the doubt, right? Yep. And I think that's where you've got to be authentic. You've got to be yourself. You've got to have some level of influence, and you've got to grip and stay tight to something you believe in and how you show up. And I think that's what ultimately, no matter what AI is out there, what video, what all this fake stuff is, that's what it is. It's the truth will prevail. Yep. But it's got to be the truth. So you've got to have a conversation with yourself to say, am I that person today? And if not, what are we doing to become that person? So if this ever did happen, there's that credibility, that reputation, there's that truth that will prevail.
And there's divisiveness. Like regardless, like there's competition in business, there's all these things, and you can use words to create divisiveness. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. The reality is like, is there really like,
it doesn't matter.
Does it matter? So it's like, how as an individual or how as a company can you show up? Can you be authentic? Can you do great quality work? Can you minimize the noise and surround yourself with the right people? And I'd like to say that there's like a magical formula. I mean, I coach people, I work with people. There's no magic formula. You can watch all of this stuff, including this podcast. If it's not coming from your truth and you start recommunicating it as your words, is that authentic? Right? So like, I work with people to get to that core of like, shut down the freaking noise, get stuff out there, reiterate, knowing that there's a lot of people that are probably going to be like, oh, well, this is good, I can take this. And there's so much out there, right? But it's how can you show up as yourself, get systems and operations in place to where you can continue to grow and scale and learn and continue to step into your own leadership skills. Powerful. And there's a million things. Like, I can teach speaking, you can probably teach speaking. I can teach leadership, you can teach leadership. Does that mean I'm right or you're wrong? No, it just means that we're coming at it from different perspectives.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is like, my client base is good for me. I would give you referrals if I felt like this person wasn't like.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other conversation.
But it is. But it's like there's
abundance.
So much divisiveness. Yeah. And I think that that's where even in relationships we have to start doing a lot of digging. We're seeing it politically. We're seeing it in all these different capacities. Can we create a sense of unity and show up in a way that is meaningful and purposeful? It all starts with us. Like, it all starts with me.
Well, I think too, and this is often with my clients around human connection, to make more revenue and to be a better leader and more output and efficiency is, are you capable and willing to put the effort into relationships that you know is needed, that I know is needed? Because that's the biggest problem that I see is no one actually puts in the effort. I can actually think when you and I spoke together at an event like a year and a half ago at the EC, I remember starting that event going, how much time a week are you spending on relationships? Not emails, not business, not clients. I'm talking about relationships. And it was like, someone was like, oh, I spend 2 hours. That was the most. And it was like, well, your whole business is on relationships. You're a solopreneur in this case. You're a one-person show. You're getting every client you have. Yep. You need to spend more time on relationships, because without those relationships, your growth isn't going to be at the scale and the level you want to succeed to. But it takes time and effort. And in what you're talking about now, fact-finding, getting to the truth, asking questions, having compassionate curiosity, like I care, and I'm compassionate about this opportunity of relationship or current relationship status, so I'm going to ask you questions. That all takes work and effort. And
to take it even a step further is, it's like, what is your intent with trying to build relationships? Is it only for you to get what you want, or is it for you to build a relationship? So like, I'm totally cool. If this is going to be a transactional relationship, like, by all means, let me know. And you don't have to come to me and say, hey, this is going to be a transactional relationship. But like, it's really important to know that information.
Yeah.
Because I don't see relationships in that way. Now, I see business transaction in that way. So totally cool. Yeah. Like, if we're going to do business together, this is what you're going to receive. This is what I'm going to receive. And there's clarity around that. Most people approach relationships because they want to sell things.
Yes.
They really do. Like, coming down to the core, they want to sell things. They want to generate revenue. And that's okay. But what's not okay is, are you using this person or using this relationship to just get you what you want and then moving on? Like, that's deeply painful. And it happens all the time. And it's okay. But just like,
the question that I ask people is, when you're asking about their family or their daughter or their vacation, do you actually fucking care? And if you don't care, then you're trying to sell something.
Don't ask them.
But if you genuinely care,
yes,
then you see like that's how I can tell if well, I don't know that person, or we're not talking about stages of the relationship,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
do you actually care? Do you care if where they went in Greece last week? And if the answer is no, that's okay. But you now know that you're operating as a transaction, not a relationship, and that's fine too. And I've learned, because I love relationships, and I talk about human connection. I think that's the way to the world. I think we're all here to create and build relationships, but I've now been able to recognize this person doesn't want a relationship and we could still do business together. Like, I asked someone recently who paid me a lot of money, "Hey, what's going on? Like, how's things? What have you been up to? I haven't talked to you." I don't need to talk about that. I don't have a lot of time. Let's cut to the facts. What's the price? What's going on? What am I getting? I
That's
used to walk
okay.
away from that
Yeah.
and be like, "Oh, but no, that person just wants to be transactional. They don't care about me, and that's fine.
It's
That's
totally cool.
okay."
Yeah, like it's
But
totally
I used to
cool.
get upset about that, right?
Yeah.
I used to be like, "Screw that person. I'm not going to work with
Yep.
them." But no, now I'm aware
Yep.
based on the exposure that I've had to it, and I can work with that person if they're a good person and they fit the mold of doing what we're going to build and work on together, you know?
And that's the thing, is like it's all about transparency, right? And I think that we all are at different stages in our own lives of what transparency means to us, and I'm learning that as well. And the reality is like there are a lot of sales and marketing programs that basically say you need to build the relationships. You need to build the relationships. You need to follow XYZ process. You need to state this, or you need to ask this question. Not that those are bad or those are wrong, but if you don't have the positive intent to actually like dive into what you're asking people and you don't care, don't freaking do it, because that's not authentic to you.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. And this, I think, bottom line, what this all comes to is like, we as individuals probably could do a great job of better defining our mission, our values. What's authenticity to us? What do relationships mean to us? How do we show up? What does communication mean to us? So like, if you're listening, like jot some of these questions down. If you don't know what these things mean to yourself, you've got to dive into it and know that over time, I ask myself this all the time. It's like every 3 months, I'm reevaluating relationships. How am I showing up? How am I serving people? Like, and the reality is like the results matter. So I also put a lot of energy and emphasis on like recommendations.
Yeah.
So if I have served you or your business in a meaningful way, leave me a recommendation, because that helps my business. And I will be more than happy to do the same if it comes from a place of truth. If you're a piece of crap and you just want to use my name of like, oh, you did you did XYZ and you want me to like build that up, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
But that's where I think real meaningful partnerships and relationships come into place, is like when we're all on our own journeys, we're all learning from one another, we're all building from one another, we're supporting and uplifting everybody, but then we're also tactically doing things that can help elevate that other person, that business. Like, I leave a Google review, it's the simplest stuff. But to your point, most people say they want to build these meaningful relationships and show up in this capacity. But if you're not willing to take a 5-minute break to write a Google review for somebody or their business and how they've showed up in a positive way, like, those things matter.
Totally.
And in a digital economy, if we want to start cutting through the noise and the bullshit, we have to start showing up for other people and helping good people and good business rise.
Yep.
So if there's I've done this for tire companies. I've done this for, we had somebody, shout out to the Success Lab. They hosted us for a small event. Like, they didn't ask for the reviews, but I left them.
Well, it's time. That's
It's
kind of come
time.
back to my point about putting time into relationships. The reason why people don't do that is because it's time, and no one actually schedules time to work on relationships. So what we do is we schedule all these meetings and we fit in these relationships, and then when those relationships don't have the attention they need, it doesn't work, and then we just roll over and we keep going to find more and more and more people, when in reality we have the right people, we just haven't built the relationship the right way because we haven't come at it from a standpoint of compassionate curiosity. Like, I keep coming back to that word because being curious, it's taught in all the sales stuff, right? But that's why it's taught in sales, because it's a sale and it's a transaction. When you actually have compassion around it,
Yep.
it's the truth. I care. I'm compassionate about it. I want to know for the good of you, us, society, whoever you interact with. And I think that's where we kind of get off track sometimes. But
And we also, like, once again, we could dive down this rabbit hole forever, because this is the lane you and I both play in, right? So, like, this is like one of our modes of genius. We also have to understand where other people are coming from and what their needs are. You mentioned that. Like, I'm not somebody that I have to be in contact with somebody 24/7 over a course of time. I have some relationships that I do that with.
of course.
Right? But like, just because I don't reach out on a cadenced monthly basis doesn't mean that I'm not showing up for you or your business.
Totally.
But if my need is this and your need is that, and I'm not doing what supports that relationship, that's where things go off kilter. So like, I have some people
communication.
find communication, right?
That's
like,
the piece.
and it's establishing. It's establishing.
Yes.
What does this, and this is something I'm asking now, I've never asked this, and it sounds kind of transactional, but it's the truth. What does partnership mean to you? What does relationship mean to you? Like, how can I communicate to better serve you, like, in this capacity? And like,
but you know what you're doing right there? You're removing the ego, because you are an expert in this. You're removing the ego and the assumption that you know. So you're asking a question because you're compassionate around helping this person at the highest capacity, right? So you're asking, so that way there's not an assumption. And what I've realized is, if you look at some of these gurus or some of these people in the self-development space, they just assume. And I think that's why I'm an odd dude. Like, I'm a weird duck, right? So when you're assuming and putting me into a system and you never ask me questions, I'm not usually the person that fits in any system. Like, I'm odd, you know?
same.
But that's where I've kind of learned that of like, what does this look like and how do you want this to work? And I'll give you an example. I signed 2 clients the same day, consulting clients. Signed them both the same day. One client says, I love the program where I can book 10 minutes on at any time, your calendar. This is awesome. I get in my head sometimes that 10 minutes is going to save me on so much overthink. The other client said, I don't want to meet. I'll call you when I need something. I don't need your calendar. I'll shoot you a text message.
Yep.
If I didn't ask how you see this relationship going, I would have been blowing up the guy who doesn't want to be blown up.
Yeah.
And I may not have put the emphasis on how important and continuing to remind the other client to book those 10 minutes
Yep.
outside of our weekly window, right? So it all started because I cared to ask a question of, hey, this is how I put the program together based on what most clients want, but how does this work? What's best for you?
Yeah.
And that guy said, dude, I don't want to meet with you every week, and I'm not going to book anything on your calendar. I just want to text you and jump on a phone call maybe that day or the next day.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where conflict can arise, right? And like, I think there's a mismatch of alignment. So, to your point, and once again, we're in the same space. So like, we learn and build and grow from one another.
Off of this, yeah.
I had to create clarity around the services that I offer. And I have a specific package, which is like an entry level way of doing business with me, so that I can better understand what a long-term relationship looks like and how I can serve your business. Maybe it's not like, maybe within that initial session, we find out like, I'm not the right fit, but Jim is the right fit.
Yeah.
And I've just found that most services, products and services, especially in the coaching, development, professional services space, are very black and white. And the reality is like, us as humans, we are not in that category. We're very multidimensional and we have different needs. So like, you may appreciate somebody reaching out directly to you on LinkedIn saying, hey, I would love to jump on a call. These are the types of services that I offer. This is how I typically engage with people, when you've never heard from them before. I find that is irritating. I'm like, do not try to send me a message and sell me on your products and services without you even understanding what I do. Like I've had people reach out to me and be like, hey, I'd love to develop your website. And I'm like, I built that website. Like that's some of the services that I offer to people in the Kajabi work that I do. So you have no clarity around even what me or my business does, and you're already
Transactional sale.
But
Pray and spray and pray.
Here's my 15-minute calendar, and it's like that's never going to go anywhere with me. It may work for somebody else, it just doesn't work for me. So like that's I think where we're at in the space is like we have to understand what each individual client needs, whether it's an individual client or a company. Tailor our products and services to fit the needs of those clients, but give it a little bit of time to figure out
what those look like,
what actual truth or reality is. I have gotten into some of these businesses where, especially like small businesses, like solopreneurs, small businesses, where they think they're at a certain and they're not. But if I would have signed a 6-month or a 1-year retainer, it would have been a whole other, because I may not be the best fit for them.
I learned that when I first launched my mastermind.
Like
people apply and put down revenue numbers. I mean, someone said they were making 650 in top line, 350 in profit. They're at 200 in top line, 25K in profit. Like, because I just did an application, read it, said, "Oh, this is in the box. This is the first mastermind I ever launched." Learned a lot. But it wasn't just one out of those 25 people. It was like 6 or 7. And the reason why is because I asked a different question after I accepted them. And then, because what I did was I accepted them, and then we did the one-on-one hour session for me to learn more, to mold and manage the mastermind. So I feel that. And it's...
Well, and that's a beautiful thing is like we're on this growth and development journey. So I will mess up.
Oh, yeah.
Like there are things that I did even 6 weeks ago where I'm like, shit, like I jacked this up.
Yeah.
But I course correct and I'm like, okay, I can show up in a better way in a new relationship, or like I can control how I do things moving forward. That doesn't mean that I have to like, I used to think that I have to go back and backtrack everything and like as an overthinker, dive into all of the different scenarios. The reality is we can't do that.
Yeah.
We can just support one another, love one another, be compassionate towards one another, and move forward. And sometimes that means collaborating with individuals and businesses.
Yeah.
Sometimes that means just showing up and doing things like this and saying, you know what, we're going to hopefully impact other people through this conversation. It can be a million different things, but just remember everybody's multidimensional. We're all hurt in some way, shape, or form. And most of us find the people that are leaning into how can I be better? How can I show up better? And how do I lead with positive intent?
I think that ends the podcast right there. Thanks, Amanda. Literally mic drop. I mean, wow. What a session. What a session today. We went deep. Well, thank you for being here today. And I admire you and what you do and how you show up. And our friendship is very important to me. So I know you're busy. I know you got the TEDx coming up and all that fun stuff. So I appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thanks for having me. We have to talk about the TEDx because you're joining as a speaker, which I'm really excited about. Yes. This will be your first TEDx, and I'm just grateful for that experience. So if you're tuning in and you want to join either Impact Effect or TEDx Old Hickory, like please do.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
We pour. The beautiful thing about events is it's just like a relationship, right? They're vastly different and they bring value in different ways. But what you will find is like Jim and I deeply care about what we're doing. Clearly, if you've listened and you stuck with us for this whole time, like we deeply care about it, and they're geared towards making a difference.
Yes.
Yours is around impact. Mine is around ideas and how can you take one beautiful seed of an idea and cause that ripple effect. It's very similar, different words, right? But I'm grateful that you're part of that, and I'm grateful for our relationship as well.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Always.